So just starting with the long feet and letting the heels sink. And as we let the front of the snooker ball heel sink, just letting the sit bones sink. Coming into that smile at the base of the back of the ribs. And let the head rest, so that smile at the base of the back of the head, so letting the eyes sink and the nose sink. And we can bring the arms over the body. And just let the arms just sink back through the shoulders into the sides of the ribs. Feeling the pointy parts of the elbows looking back to the thighs. Because we know that when the elbows are out to the sides, it connects us to the top of the shoulder. So we let the elbows swing round. So we've got this rotation in this long arm bone at the top, and the elbow can just swing. And that lets the arm just drop back through the socket into the side of the ribs, into the chest. And it can start to feed the ribby spine. And we start to get this broadness on the front of the chest. So it's just feeling that we've got that sinking back. We have a tendency to round the back of the thoracic, particularly if we're sitting at the desk. Oh, let me just pop you on mute if you're not on mute. So we're looking at creating this space on the front of the chest. Let the back of the chest just start to broaden out and soften. And the long little finger side starts to come through into the side of the ribs. So can we just let the arms start to draw the underarm open, and the arms just start to go towards the top of the mat. We've got the long side of the ribs and into the side of the underarm. Let the jaw sink back so that we can create space at the base of the skull and the top of the neck. So we feel like we've got this drawing up under the ribs, drawing up under the chin, up under the jaw. And we start to create space in the ribby spine and in the neck spine, and the back of the head just starts to get some space from the top of the spine. And you might find that as the jaw comes into the back of the head and we start to create space at the hyoid process, so that if you draw a line back from your jaw, there's this sort of right angle that comes into the front of the neck. When we let space happen there, we can also feel that the drawbridge of the sacrum starts to roll away in response as well. So there's a two-way movement that happens there, because whatever's happening in the back of the head is linked to the back of the pelvis. So we just start to feel this process of unwinding. There's a broadness to the back of the pelvis. And we can just start to drop in behind the ears, behind the jaw bones. So the tongue rests in the well of the mouth and the vocal cords start to sink back. So we're buttoning the arms and the chest and the neck and the jaw all together, in that they are all slung together. So the more the arms come back through the sockets into the ribs, And we keep connecting with that broadness at the base of the spine. As the arms come up towards the top of the mat, and that creates space in each individual ribs at the side of the chest. We feel that as the arms come up towards the top of the mat, there's this dropping back of the head at the top of the skull, at the base of the skull, top of the spine. And the legs just feed through the hips into the side of the waist. So you might find that the front tummy starts to get drawn back into the lumbars. And that between the hips, the front tummy there starts to get drawn back towards the spine. So we feel the arms are connected all the way down the side of the ribs, all the way through the obliques into the inner edges of the hips. And take you all the way down to the pelvic floor. So as that happens, can we create space all the way up through the chest vertebrae, all the way through the neck vertebrae, into the underside of the skull and the base of the head. So when we bring the arms back up over the body, we might find again that we have really got some space starting to open up into the underarms. And we start to become aware of that deep center at the solar plexus, that base of the ribs. Can we create space in the two directions there? So we go up and down the spine equally. Almost like rippling out. If we dropped a stone into the center of the body like we do into the pond, there would be a rippling out effect that would happen up into the back of the head and down into the back of the pelvis. And when we really get this, we feel that the arms become super floaty. There's a real effortlessness to them, like they're suspended through the shoulder sockets. And there's a real spaciousness and relaxation that happens at the side of the neck and the top of the shoulders. And for those of us that are a little bit further on in our journey, we might find that the right heel becomes very heavy on the ground. And the front of the ankle can just sink into the back of the ankle, into the heel, and the heel can just be drawn away towards the end of your mat. And your sticky mat might work against you on this a little bit, but we're really feeling that the heel is being pulled away and the whole leg is getting drawn out from the underside of the ribs. So there's a connection between the arms and the legs that happens there. Can we stay with that space in the base of the ribs? Does that shift when the legs start to move? And can we keep it so that stones drop through T12, through the base of the ribs, through the top of the lumbars, can we just leave it alone? So the leg moves, but not much happens within the spine, not much happens in the shoulders, not much happens in the back of the pelvis. And the same with drawing back in. Can we just allow, it's almost like a sigh out, but can we just allow that drop through the center of the body, through that solar plexus, so that the leg just effortlessly slides back in towards you? And it is a practice, not a perfect. And it may be that, you know, we need to slow these movements right down. You know, a lot of the time we've got habitual repetitive movements, so we just stick a leg out from the hip and everything else gets pulled around in response. So can we take our time with the sliding of the foot, and we notice at those incremental stages as it's extending away, the responses, we can feel the responses in the abdomen and the inside of the spine. We can feel the responses through the ribs. And the same when we're withdrawing the leg back in towards us. Can we just take our time? Can we leave the back of the heel to become super heavy? And like I say, if it's worth to get your sticky mat out of the way and just slide on the carpet, then it might be better. But we're just noticing where we throw the body weight. Are we more heavily into the side of the hip of the leg that's being sent away? Are we changing the weight distribution through the back of the chest and the shoulders in response to that leg lengthening away? Can we feel the big toe joint and the inside of the heel drawing the foot away? You know, there's a lot going on here in quite a simple movement, but it all serves to send the work back into the center of the tummy and the underside of the ribs. Same as with the arm movement we were doing previously, because the arms don't finish at the shoulder, they finish at the spine. So when we're doing arms and legs at the same time, it becomes a body-wide event with limbs rippling out from the solar plexus. And you might find that there's some kind of a rhythm to it, that as the leg pulls out of the solar plexus, it causes the arms to go up towards the top of the mat, or as the arms go up towards the top of the mat, it causes the legs to ripple out in the opposite direction. Can we let the spine be free? It's very easy here to pull the low spine into the ground. It's very easy here to pull the neck spine into the ground and to start to flatten out curves of the spine, because the brain thinks that gives us a stable foundation, but actually we don't want that. We want the curves of the spine to be present, and we don't want to be bracing through the body if we can help it. So where do we need more space? If we give the knees a wave, we feel more space in the front of the hips and the groins. If we give the elbows a wave, it gives us more space around the underarm and the top of the shoulder. So it's keeping coming back to these major joints. And again, just being wary of very bent arms at the elbow, because if the side of the rib and the underarm doesn't want to get involved, the arms just will bend at the elbow. So just noticing the difference between keeping the pointy part of the elbow looking up towards the ceiling, feeling like somebody's got hold of the fingers, so the fingers get extended away, the arms get pulled away, which pulls the arms straight without locking out through elbows. And just following that movement, noticing the point where the elbows would like to bend and give relief to the underarms and the side of the ribs, but actually can we stay with it, because we're looking for that softness, that opening to the side of the ribs, which we don't get when we're bent at the elbows. And arms are heavy, so it might mean that your arms don't come up as far as you're used to. We're keeping the ribs back in, dropping that kinetic raindrop. Always makes me think of the kinetic raindrops at Singapore airport. We're just dropping one of those through the underside of the ribs, through into the floor. So the next time we come back to center, we're just going to let the knees float in towards you. Give the knees a nice hug. Having a little rock from side to side. I'm going to come over to whichever side is comfortable for you and come into our square pose. So knees underneath the hips and hands underneath the shoulders. It might be useful to have the hands just one palm a little further forward than the shoulders, particularly if you're working with the pointy parts of the elbows looking back round towards the heel, towards the thigh. It helps us to start to get this idea that the hands are pulled down into the ground. And when the hand gets pulled down into the ground, there's this reciprocal pull of the arm back through into the ribs. And we need that because we want the arms to be pulling through the ribs and extending the neck and the head away. Draws the jaw back round the back of the head. So it's exactly the same as we were doing when we were laying on our back. We've just changed our orientation to the floor. The nose into the back of the head, the eyes into the back of the head. And just starting to sit behind the tongue. In your mind's eye, just starting to sit behind the vocal cords, behind the collarbones. Can we touch in with these spaces behind everything at the front? So we feel that the hands get pulled down into the ground. We're behind the knuckles into the center of the palm. And that gives us a lovely long ribs, lovely long low spine. And the sit bones start to get drawn away. So again, just like we were doing when we were laying on our back, it feels like this unfurling that happens. The back of the head is drawn away towards the top of the wall in front of you. The sit bones are drawn away towards the top of the wall behind you. And there's a suspension of the spine that starts to happen throughout the middle of the structures. The feet get pulled down into the ground, the front of the ankles and the shins get pulled down into the ground. Center of the palm. So just like we were doing when we were laying on our back, because the hands get pulled down into the ground, that gives you space into the wrist. We can make circles with the elbow here because it's spacious. We feel that the back of the arm has to work a little bit harder rather than the top of the shoulder. That happens when we swing the elbows round. Takes us into the triceps. And we want the triceps and the side of the rib because they're underused. And when they're underused, other stuff gets overused. So can we go back or send the work back to that centre part of the body, sides of the ribs and the solar plexus? Where's our kinetic raindrop? In the solar plexus now. So again, we start to feel that from the solar plexus, the hands pull the ribs and the head pulls the neck away towards the wall in front of you. As the low spine sends the sacrum away, and the feet and the shins and the feet pull down into the ground and pull the low spine away. So we start going in two directions at once. It's subtle, but it's worth the work. So for some of us, we might need to pull the front of the ribs in. For some of us, we might need to let the back of the ribs drop. And because we can't see there, we have to feel. So go in behind the heart and the lungs. Can we let there be space between the ears and the shoulder blades? So where are the shoulder blades on the back of the body? Are they up around the ears, or can we let them draw into across the back of the ribs? Can we let them draw down the back of the ribs? And we might need to rest from time to time because it's work. Can we make circles with the elbow? We keep coming back to this point. Where are we locking out? Where are we hanging out in the spine, or where are we pushing away? You know, our cat pose sort of starts to appear from here. This is good. So just going to come to sitting for a second. I'm just making sure I'm in the other camera view. So with the centre palm of the hand, so just taking your dominant side, when we're presenting to the ground, the tendency is that we're collapsing, we're falling through. So I can see lots of people on the screen sort of waving their wrists and doing all this stuff because we've never been trained to put our hands on the floor. So as soon as we've engaged this line, it closes the joint at the wrist. And then, you know, we've got a lot of load coming through here and it doesn't feel very nice. So we have to go back behind the palm, and we want to feel, if we turn the palm upwards like this, we want to feel that we've got a gravity button through the underside of the palm. And you can do this, you can just take the skin really gently and just pull down towards the ground, and you will feel that this real center part of the palm, it's like a vortice. So it creates a passageway that goes all the way up through your arm and will feed back to the spine. It doesn't come in at this point at the top of the shoulder, it comes in at the heart center. So if we keep pulling in here, what we feel, and I want you to try this for yourself, is just feeling that this center part of the palm, behind the knuckles and in front of the rooty thumb, can just open out. It can just separate, and it's like a flower in the palm of your hand. So initially the fingers stretch, because that's how the brain works. But actually we want to be more subtle than that. We go in behind the fingers. We're not too worried about those. They just grab food and, other nice things. But the center of the palm, can we really feel that as this gravity button in the back of the palm can start to open the center of the palm? This is making sense. And like I say, the dominant side is quite easy, but the non-dominant side may not be so easy. And it is a practice, not a perfect, because we're not taught this stuff. We deal in fingers, we don't deal in palms, because we're just not that subtle. So we're looking at that subtle art of being able to open. My left one doesn't want to play ball because the fingers are wagging around all over the place, but we keep sending that back to the center of the palm. So, and what you'll feel is that as the center of the palm starts to open, and it might be a little bit stiff and a bit sticky, and it might be a little bit tight through this palm plexus, there's a lot of dense connective tissue here. So as that starts to open out and soften, we'll start to feel a response in the collarbones and a response in the deep shoulder, in underneath the collarbones and underneath the ribs. If we imagined ourselves walking around inside the chest wall and we were looking, this is a big visualization, so if you're not a visualizing person, stick with me. But if you're walking around inside your own ribs and you're looking up at the inside of your shoulder, you can see the ball of the long arm bone sticking through or looking through into the chest. And when we can imagine that, and yeah, you might need to close your eyes. I do. I'm always got my eyes screwed up like I'm 5. But when we start to see ourselves from the inside out, we can make more space. And when we're tight at the shoulder, or we're a little bit collapsed through the thoracic, or we've got tension at the neck, all of this stuff gets pulled inwards and we start to collapse inwards. And this is how we look when we're 80. So this is where it starts. So when we're inside the spine, behind the heart and the lungs, the palms get dragged in, the fingers go with it, and everything gets hunched round. So when we are feeling that we can open out through the palms, which gives us space into the wrist. And again, some of these tissues might be a little bit snug. So if it's nice to put your thumb between the bones of the forearm at the wrist, you can just gently feel that those bones can separate. There are 2 here, one of them static, one of them's not. So you can separate the bones here, and you can just take that thumb all the way up between the bones, up to the elbow. Now, for those of us that do desk sitting, beware the mousy forearm, because one side might yield to you quite easily and the other side might be a little bit tight. So we just slide the thumb from the wrist up to the elbow and just create space between those bones, because they're supposed to spiral. You can see that. But for a lot of us, it might be a little bit stiff, a little bit sticky and a bit snug. So the wrists start to get closed down and the elbows start to get closed down and the shoulders get drawn in. So as we start to open through the palm, as we start to soften behind the heart and the lungs into that vertebrae, they are linked together. So we need the broadness at the inside of the chest, looking up at the balls of the humeral bones, of the long arm bones, looking through those shoulder sockets. Can we feel that broadness there? It draws the head back into the gravity line. You can feel it. But you also find that as we get that broadness into the chest, the hands will start to open out as well. So if we stay with that and come back into our square pose, if we stay with that broadness that draws the head into the back of back into the gravity line. And then we've got that spaciousness that's coming out through the arm into the palms. Can we start to feel that the very center of the palm now, we've got that pull down through the very center, because the more it pulls, the more it broadens and softens, and it gives us an interface that can, it gives us a palm that can interface with the ground. And it's not collapsing, because what we find is that when we really get that gravity button into the palm and pulling down into the ground, arches of the hand form that look like arches of the feet. So give it a try and have a look, because what we tend to do is when we put our hands on the ground, they go flat. And again, that closes the joint. So this is why it's useful to have the hand, maybe one hand bit in front of the shoulder, because when we place it dead straight under the shoulder, it just can collapse completely, and we're not looking for that. So we're looking for that reciprocal relationship with the ground. So if we think of hands like feet with arches, just experiment with that.
I've been trying to put my palm flat into the ground. I thought that's what I was supposed to be doing.
We all do.
By having the gravity button in the middle, I thought I was pulling the palm flat down, and it's been really hurting the pads of my thumb and the outside.
Yeah, because it's too much an extension at that point. So when we pull down, so we always pull down into the ground to cause upward lift. Always. That's what gravity buttons are for. They pull down into the ground to cause upward lift. So it's a little bit like, and I'll go back to that old analogy of the tennis ball. If I throw the tennis ball at the ground, I've introduced force and direction, but I don't have to catch the tennis ball when it hits the floor and throw it up towards the ground, because there's elastic structures inside it that recoil. So when we put gravity buttons underneath things on the ground, it's because what we want to do to fire for the brain is to cause that tennis ball bounce. We want the elastic structures inside the hands and then through the arm and up into the shoulder. Is more easily felt in the legs because we're more used to standing. So this one is tricky to get. It takes time. Because initially, because we're very shoulder dominant and we're very head dominant, we tend to put our hands on the ground and then we're just load bearing through here, and it closes the wrist joint and it becomes painful. So what we want to do is we've always got two movements available to us. We've got a gross movement and a subtle movement. So the gross movement is very easy. We can put our hands down, we can lock out through the joints, and we've got hands on the ground. Or we can start to, a little bit like, and lots of us have got animals on these screens. So for those of us who have got cats, if you can watch cats run, they levitate. They barely touch the ground. Dogs as well. When they're trotting, are fantastic, because you see their paws and they barely touch the ground. There's this trot, trot, trot thing happening. And if you really watch them, the second they've touched the ground, there's a spring recoil that's happening up. And for cats particularly, because the shoulder blade is less attached to the ribs than humans. But when you watch them when they're running, there's so much coming back through the system and it's firing the spine. So there's this recoil in and this kinetic stored energy that gets fired back out. And it's just like bouncing tennis balls. And Fabi, this might have just thrown your brain completely under the bus. Because it's such a different way of looking at it. You watch Usain Bolt run, he doesn't touch the ground. There's this almost, trotting dog-like quality to him. When you watch all the runners, they're all the same. They're an energy-efficient system. And it's like a reaction, like pistons that go upwards and backwards to the spine and then back out again. This is what causes dynamic movement. So can we bring that into a static movement like our square pose, where we've got this hand that's being pulled down into the ground, but there's a reciprocal pull back up of the fascia that takes us back into the ribs. So we could, and this is for those of us that are a bit further along in our journey again, if we took the knees off the floor, we could take ourselves for a little walk. That bit's really hard work, by the way. Can we take ourselves for a little springy, trotty walk? You know, notice where we start to lock out, because that's how the brain works. You know, are we locking out through the elbows? Do we get all up in the shoulders and the neck? We don't want that. Can we send it back to solar plexus over and over and over again? So we make ourselves this kind of light and springy and lifty connection back to the spine. Is this making sense? It's hard work because, as I say, we are very used to being up in the shoulders, and we're not used to arms connecting to solar plexus, and that's what these sessions are for. Keep coming back to this, sending the arms back to the solar plexus, sending the legs back to the solar plexus over and over again. I'm glad you're demonstrating help there, Sarah Jane. This is always good. It's good to just stick a paw out. This is how you do it. By the way. It's fascinating when you watch animals roll over, you know, they pull themselves by the spine down into the ground, and then the limbs just get flopped over to the other side. You know, they don't lever themselves off the floor. They are perfect in gravity in the ground, and they allow the connective tissue in them to respond and do the job. It's only really humans and the thinky cortex that gets caught up and gets stuck in our own way. So this is good. So if we just take the sit bones back towards something that is like a child pose. We want to keep the tail high, so we're not tipping the tail under. Can we leave the hands pulled down into the ground? So again, we've got that pull of the centre of the palm down into the ground, which causes this opening into the underarms. So as we go back, we get that spaciousness into the side of the ribs again. The jaw comes into the back of the head. Can we stay behind the heart and the lungs and into the inside of the neck? So if we pull down through the shins and come back to the centre, we've got legs attached to the inside of the low spine. Can we just take the right hand up to the top left-hand corner of our mat? And again, if you're able to slide, it's great. So your sticky mat might work against you on this one. But if you are on carpet and you're able to slide, it's like somebody's got hold of the fingers and the palm, and they're just drawing up towards that opposite top corner of your mat and then coming back. So can we feel that this is a ribby move? So the arm is connected to the side of the ribs, so the ribs rotate. You might find it's a little bit snug around the side of the ribs, and that's okay. And when we're drawing back, can it be the ribs drawing back level first that draws the arm with it? And have a go on, you know, one side and then change over sides as you need. So again, we're looking for that springiness, that sprung system, connected system. We might feel that the edges of the feet, long little toe side, connects with the side of the connects with the side of the leg, connects with the side of the ribs all the way up. So we're looking at that connected fascial line. So follow that. There might be breaks in the system depending on how connected the brain is to the body. So be patient with yourselves. And it might take us into places that feel a little bit stiff and a little bit sticky. You might have one side that's easier than the other. And it's this rotation to thoracic that, you know, as we come through there, just noticing where the sticky bits are. So Diana, just letting the jaw go back in, nose go back in, eyes go back in. That's it. So as the rib rotation happens, it then comes up through the neck, and the head is the last to. Yeah, it's much better. So it feels like, again, there's this sort of long spiral. There's a real corkscrew that happens all the way out through the crown of the head. So the return is between the shoulder blades that brings us back to center. This is good. So we're just taking the sit bones back, and we can walk the hands back in and just make some circles with the heels, just softening through the feet. And we're just feeling that as the feet open up, the sit bones can come back. Takes us towards the squat pose, but we're not too worried about that. What we are interested in is, again, that pull down through the foot, so that springiness that happens to the foot, because when we pull down through the foot, the arches of the feet appear as a result of that. And it's something that we take for granted, you know, and when we don't have that, we end up with flat feet, you know, when there's systematic collapse through the feet and they're just, there's no reciprocal upward lift. This is where the fallen arches come from. So we're looking for that active foot. It's a little bit like, you know, when the cat is padding the cushions, it's that sort of a feel that, again, we're behind the balls of the feet, just like we were in the hands. We're behind the knuckles and in front of the snooker ball heel. So we start to get into this deep center of the foot and allow that to be pulled down into the ground. And then that gives us arches of the feet and a lift. And again, that very, very center part of the foot is a passageway that goes all the way up through the leg, through the hips, and looks directly. Initially, it looks directly at the sacrum, and then we'll go all the way up the spine into the underside of the ribs. So, and as I say, one side might be easier than the other. I obviously prefer my right because I don't want to do my left. But we can do that. So again, it's learning to present our hands and feet to the ground without collapsing. Can we get this nice upward lift that starts to happen as the foot comes down to the ground? We get an upward lift that starts to happen through the hip, through the waist. It will cause you to stand up. You know, even from this compromised position, it will cause you to stand up. But we don't stand up because we lever the floor away. We stand up because we're pulled down into the ground. And again, it starts to make us more of a sprung system. And the feet might have to work quite hard, so take your time there. And again, when we come up to standing, it might be that we can feel the pull of the foot down into the ground. We keep space in the back of the knee, space in the front of the ankle, space in the front of the hip. It's an interesting one for those of us that are a little bit collapsy, and I am one. Can we put a finger in the front of the hip or a finger in the back of the knee? And the aim of the game, and it is a game, is not to squash your finger. Can we do that when we're in these arrangements of starting to come up off the floor? And if you need things around you to help you come up, that's great. And if you're starting to work with coming up off the floor without your hands, then it's kind of where we are. But we can pull the gravity buttons down through the feet to stand up. We can also pull our gravity buttons down through the feet to come back down as well. So can we do that again without collapsing through the center? So we're keeping the head into the back of keeping the jaw into the back of the head, keeping the ribs up. It's hard work for the center of the body, but it takes the load out of the knees. So can we feel that we've got sit bones in a sling? So if we're just standing already, can we feel that we've got our sit bones just in a sling ever so slightly, because we're just lifting. Again, the sacrum is a roof, it's not a back wall. So we return the sacrum to its roof-type status, which tilts the pelvis ever so slightly. So like we've said this before, for many of us, pelvis is tilted under, we've got no bottom, all of that stuff, because the pelvis is actually tucked under, the knees are locked out, which gives us the illusion of straight, but actually it's not quite right. So, and we feel that because all the body weight gets thrown back into the heels. So can we again take the work back into the center of the feet? If we pull the balls of the feet down into the ground enough, we can slide the ankles forward. And then when we pull the heels into the ground, the feet will come back down to ground. And we want to be looking at this. We want to be feeling, it's interesting, isn't it? We work out with, all the middle of the body, but we don't do anything with the hands and the feet. So can we feel behind the balls of the feet pulling down into the ground? That will give us space into the center of the foot. And because we just pull down into the ground, we feel the upward lift that comes through the center of the body. The height of your body doesn't change very much. It's just the feet that get put through their paces in this one. And can we feel what's going on around the pelvic area? What needs to stabilize to hold us into this movement? Have we got these arms coming through the sockets, wrapping around the ribs? Have we got the jaw wrapping around the back of the head? Because that all helps, again, to take us in the two directions. I'm just going to move that slightly. We're always gathering the arms in to the ribs. Gives us strength and stability in standing. So as we draw legs through into solar plexus, so we draw arms through ribs into the center here. And we just do a couple more of that, just pulling the balls of the feet down into the ground. What needs to happen in the pelvis? Can we leave the sit bones high without tucking under and use the center, real center parts of the pelvis, deep muscles inside the pelvis, deep muscles inside the central corset of the waist. And it's all right if we wobble backwards and forwards a little bit. So from here, we're just going to take one foot in front of the other. Have something near you if you're a bit wobbly. And, you know, we want to find our way into stability. So don't be worried about sticking your hand on a chair or on a wall near to you or something like that. So when we've got one foot in front of the other, we're going to find the big toes and just rotate the thighs in towards you just a little bit, inside of the heels. Rotate the thighs in towards each other just a little bit. So we start to get this sort of a drawing in, a gathering in on the inside of the legs and through the pelvis. So can we feel that we can pull the feet down into the ground this time? We go this way. And this one's more tricky, but can we just pull the feet down into the ground and let the heels leave the ground? We don't lift the heels. As soon as we lift the heels, it throws the body weight forwards and it's all over. So we're looking at just staying with that focus of just pulling down into the ground, just pulling down into the ground, into the ground. As we come up through the spine, we feel that there's a broadness in the ribs and the arms can start to float outwards. And if that's enough, and it's perfectly fine for it to be enough, then that's great. But if you really want to put the icing on the cake, we are going to, which foot is forward? So if your left foot is forwards, you are going to look to your right. And if your right foot is forwards, you are going to look to your left. And you'll have to work for it because we need the thighs to rotate in and look at each other. So Lisa, your feet want to be a little bit closer to each other. That's it. So one foot in front of the other. And can we just pull down? Let the lumbers drop into the feet. And let the arms lift the ribs up off the waist. Let the head lift the arms, lift the spine off the waist. And then we're going to change over sides, if you haven't already. So again, we're just taking that time, just feel the feet into the ground. Find the big toe joints and the inside of the heels so that we've got that lovely rotation of the thighs. Because when the thighs sort of roll in and up, as is the line of the adductors, it pulls the back of the pelvis forwards and in. It's not a tucking under, it's a forwards and in that starts to pull you into the front tummy. So you should feel it in the transverse abs, which is across the front of between your hips, and then feeling it into the rectus abdominis, which will take you all the way up into the underside of the ribs. So we feel that pull down, which then feeds into the underside of the ribs. And again, it's like we can see the balls of the humeruses, the long arm bones, and they're just being drawn in towards the spine. Because they're pulled in, they go up. It's like puppeteering. We just pull that string and stuff happens with the arms. But it comes from spine. And then, of course, if you want to look to your left or your right, then you can do that, depending on which foot is forwards. But we're really feeling that pull down into the ground and that broadness, that lengthening of spine that happens, which frees the head enough, where we've got enough space at the base of the skull. Then the turn of the head starts to happen. This is good. So we're letting ourselves come back to the centre. Feet have worked quite hard, so we're going to be gentle there. Okay, that's good. So just taking the feet a little bit wider, than hip width. We're going to come into the outer edges of the feet. And again, it's really easy to see here, a little bit like, you know, when we're working with the hands into the ground, it can be a little bit tricky to feel the arches of the hand because it's not something that we've generally been taught before. But when we take the feet a little bit wider apart, it's very easy. We can roll the feet inwards and collapse the arches. But the long little toe sides can pull down into the ground. We can see that the arches lift. When we pull the heels down into the ground, the toes get sucked back towards the ankles. When we're behind the balls of the feet, we pull those down into the ground. It creates the arches of the feet. It's hard work for feet, but it's worth it. And it's the same when the hands come down to the ground as well. Can we get that lightness and springy lift all the time? The back of the pelvis gets involved when the front of the snooker ball heel pulls down into the ground. So we feel, as that pulls down into the ground, there's a connection at the top of the leg and the base of the pelvis. And it starts to fire up through the hips into the deep waist. So when we're working in this way, because we're creating space in the front of the ankle, space in the back of the knee, space in the front of the hip, it gives us freedom to move. So we start to get a little bit of space at the groins, top of the adductors going into the pelvic floor. And if we just pull down on one side, so long little toe side on the left side, if we just keep pulling down on there, just keep pulling down on there, and we're taking the leg out from the underside of the rib, then it will start to send us in a direction of something. And then if we pull down on the side that we're over towards, that will start to pull the joints open and it will send us back in the other direction. So again, it's that pull down into the ground that causes us to move in a certain way. Can we stay into the big toe joint and the inside of the heel on the side that we're coming across to? So we don't want to load the knee. So we've still got this upward lift through the side of the waist, side of the ribs, and into the side of the neck and the shoulders again. So we can pull down and go back the other way. And exactly that, Lisa, if you want to bring arms in as well, arms grow from solar plexus out. And it makes the beginnings of something that in yoga would look like a warrior two, but it's a warrior two that's being pulled up out of the ground. So it's very light and it's very lifty. If we just kept feeling the pull down through one side, and we just kept pulling and just kept pulling and just kept pulling and just kept pulling, we would go quite far. The foot might even come off the ground. Yeah. And that's for a little bit further on. Notice so my right shoulder was helping. So back to the beginning, start again. Can we just stay with the foot pulling down into the ground? Notice what shoulders are getting up to. They are the great gate crashers of the party. They always want to be involved in everything. And if the shoulders are involved, then we've got tension in the neck, and that's going to start adversely affecting us. So can we just feel that we've got that connection, that connected fascial line all the way through the hip, through the tummy, through the ribs, through the shoulder. Might even start you on a rotatey sort of a journey.
Kaz, can you just say again where you're pulling down?
In your feet?
Yeah, so you said I thought you said on the left little toe side.
Yeah, which will send you over to the right.
So if I pull down on my left little toe side, it wants to pull me over that way, not over that way.
So yeah, so again, the difference between the subtle and the gross moves. So if we pull down into the ground and the knee starts to lock out, it's going to take you in that direction. If we find the big toe joint, the inside of the heel, We've got a gravity button underneath the long little toe side. It pulls down into the ground. And what we start to feel is we've got space at the front of the ankles, space at the back of the knee, space at the front of the hip, and then it starts to open up through the side of the waist. So it's more subtle than that. So we feel that as the arch lifts, it creates space into the underside of the thigh and the underside of the groins there. And then if we have a hand underneath the solar plexus, then we can just guide. We just do this nice lift with the hand underneath the solar plexus, and we're taking the ribs in the opposite direction, which starts to open the waist. So then we're almost pulling down in the two directions again. And the hand underneath the solar plexus will just help to give an idea of where we want the body to go, because it doesn't know that that's available to them yet. So we just keep pulling down here. We've got a tangible fascial connection that comes through the hip over into the opposite shoulder, rather than just straight up and down. There is a connection straight up and down the side of the waist. And we feel that as a lengthening, but if we keep pulling down, because the other side isn't pulling down, it's going to send us over to that other side. Does that help, Ronnie?
I think so. I don't seem to be moving much.
You may not move very much because the brain isn't used to working in a connected way, and it still sees everything as individual parts. You know, for me with this one, the biggest pain for me with this one was when I pulled my foot into the ground, the knee just used to lock out. And it blocked all the connection. And as soon as the knee locks out, the messages from the foot cannot get to the waist and can't get to the brain either. So, you know, we have to work to bypass these sort of habits that we've got in place, particularly on the right side. You know, that knee really likes to be locked out all the time. So it's re-educating ourselves to get past the joints. So if the foot pulls into the ground and the knee locks out, I get this movement. If I take that foot out of the way, if the foot gets pulled down into the ground, the knee locks out, I get this movement. If I take the knee out of the way and just let the back of the knee open, now the thigh bone can go through into the side of the waist. And it's different. So again, there's a gross move and a subtle move, in that I can push my foot into the ground and lock the knee out, or I can pull my foot into the ground. And it's like one of those funky dances where you're looking to wind the leg back through the hip into the deep waist, into the ribs. And for those of us that are a little bit further on, you can take that all the way up the spine, out through the shoulder and into the opposite hand. You can feel that. And there'll be one side that's really easy, and then one side that's not so easy. So we're starting to look at, or to get the brain to acknowledge, that tennis ball bounce. That when the tennis ball of the foot pulls down into the ground, it goes up through the leg, through the waist, through the ribs, through the shoulder and out. A little bit like John Travolta. This is good. It's deep stuff, but it's worth it. And you know, we can do this. It's there in our everyday life. It's for getting things out of cupboards becomes a body-wide event. It's getting things out in the garden becomes a body-wide event, not just hanging limbs out of sockets. Yeah, not just locking out through joints. This is good. So we're going to come down to sitting just for a moment, or laying if you want to take that for a moment. And just coming back to yourself. And just noticing how your body feels from when you started. And it might be that the brain's sort of fizzing away with lots of different bits and pieces going on. And just noticing the breathing. As we breathe in, we've got that lovely expansive ribs, and as we breathe out, ribs come back towards the spine, the shoulders again can drop away from the ears. And then we're just going to give the fingers and toes a wiggle. Make some rotations with the wrists and the ankles. Taking the arms up over the head and the legs long for a nice stretch through body. And bringing the knees up to the chest, giving the knees a nice hug. Have a little rock from side to side. And coming over onto whichever side is comfortable for you. Returning back up to sitting in your own time.